Hello, and welcome to Tin Pan Alley. I'm George Calderaro, founding director of the Tin Pan Alley American Popular Music Project, a nonprofit organization created to commemorate and continue the legacy of Tin Pan Alley, the birthplace of American popular music on West 28th Street in New York City. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, West 28th Street between Broadway and Sixth Avenue was home to dozens of sheet music publishers in what was the city's entertainment and cultural district. I'm delighted to introduce our guide, historian Miriam Berman, author of Madison Square and its celebrated landmarks, who will lead us through Tin Pan Alley and discuss the music publishers, writers, and performers who worked on Tin Pan Alley at the turn of the 20th century and beyond. Thank you and welcome, Miriam.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Miriam Berman, and as a Madison Square historian and author of Madison Square, the park and its celebrated landmarks, I have always had quite an interest in nearby Tin Pan Alley and the fascinating stories about all the well-known songs, composers, and performers which the area produced. Tin Pan Alley was the birthplace of American popular music industry and the inspiration for the term the Great American Songbook. Not an actual book, rather collections of some of the most important and influential American popular songs and jazz standards. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, West 28th Street between Broadway and Sixth Avenue was home to dozens of sheet music publishers in what was the city's entertainment and cultural district at the time. Tin Pan Alley would become synonymous with songwriting in the same way that Hollywood became associated with filmmaking. On December 10th, 2019, the New York City Landmarks Commission designated numbers 47 through 55 West 28th Street, 5 individual Tin Pan Alley landmarks based on their cultural significance as the birthplace of American popular music. In further recognition of the significance of Tin Pan Alley, on April 2nd, 2022, the city of New York officially co-named 28th Street between Broadway and Sixth Avenue Tin Pan Alley. I'm going to introduce Tin Pan Alley to you with the rather personal account of how I first learned about the area and how my fascination with this unique block emerged. Interestingly enough, one of the first publishers to set up shop on West 28th Street in 1893 was M. Whitmark and Sons at numbers 49 and 51. One of the earliest pieces of sheet music produced from this location was a composition titled The Madison Square March Two-Step, composed by Edward J. Abram in 1895. I had the good fortune of finding this piece of sheet music while rummaging through an ephemera shop in the 1980s. Many years before I wrote my book. Familiar as I was with Madison Square, having maintained my graphic design office there at the time, I simply could not resist the impressive typographic design of the sheet music cover. As I began to learn more about the area, I drew my own personal thoughts that perhaps this composition was created as a kind of musical calling card to announce the early arrival of M. Whitmark to nearby Madison Square. Further supporting this idea was when I came across the company's telephone exchange of Madison Square 778. I might also mention that it wasn't until 2014, when Madison Square Park celebrated its bicentennial year, that I heard Whitmark's rendition of the two-step for the first time. By then, I had made the acquaintance of John Lambert of the Gramercy Brass and Robert Ruggiero, a composer on the synthesizer, who each became enamored with the piece and offered their renditions. Here, a sampling of the Madison Square March Two-Step by John Lambert and the Gramercy Brass. So now that we have been somewhat introduced to the Whitmarks by way of their Madison Square March two-step, I think it appropriate to begin our Tin Pan Alley tour here at 4951 West 28th on the north side of the street at the Whitmarks' first office space. Founded in 1886, the Whitmark family lived in a modest residential apartment building at 402 West 40th Street. Where they opened a little print shop and were able to produce small print jobs for various businesses. With Marcus Whitmark, a German-Jewish immigrant, at the helm, and his 5 very talented sons, Isidore, Jay, Julius, Frank, and Eddie, each who had by chance a natural innate ability required to build a music business like that of a printer, a promoter, a singer, a composer, and a musician, certainly the makings to form their very own firm. Having outgrown their small print shop space, they were in need of a new, larger office for their business. There was only one catch. This was that Marcus's sons at the time ranged in age from 7 to 17, making them all underage to run a business legally on their own. So they moved into a converted row house building at 4951 West 28th under the protective guise of their father, Marcus, and opened their venture as M. Whitmark and Sons, important emphasis on sons. Marcus, as it turned out, had no real interest in music as a business, but recognized the pooled talents of his young sons. Their firm was to become one of the most successful music publishing companies to emerge from Tin Pan Alley. Within 4951, Whitmark found a few other businesses in residence. One of the more prestigious since 1890 was the Dramatic Exchange of Gustav Frohman, one of the celebrated Frohman brothers, who were the owners and theatrical producers of American Broadway theaters and would eventually come to operate major motion picture production companies. Devoted to theatrical enterprises, they installed on the topmost floor of number 49 a small theater to allow visiting dramatists an opportunity to try out new plays in an informal setting. This unique area, located just under the pitched roof, which you see atop number 49, exists to this day, of course, as a residential space. M. Whitmark and Sons would remain at 4951 from 1893 until 1898, at which time, due to their continued success and a fast-growing business, they found it necessary to acquire a larger space of their very own and relocated just around the corner at 8 West 29th Street. At their new location, they were able to customize the entire building suitable to all of their diversified departments, establishing their own music library on the ground floor, and within a year producing their own monthly magazine featuring articles and advertisements for the music and show business industry. Their further success and diversifications would lead them in 1903 to their final location, an entire office building built exclusively for their needs at West 37th Street. Whitmark would be bought out by Warner Brothers in the late 1920s when film companies introduced sound and found the need for an endless amount of music resources. One of the most unique features of Tin Pan Alley was that this strip was capped to the west at 6th Avenue and 28th Street by the 6th Avenue elevated train stop. Those going to and from their destination here consisted of musicians, composers, publishers, and of course, depending on the time of day, residents, tourists, shoppers, and audiences all merging together and rubbing elbows with one another on a daily basis. This train stop, juxtaposed to 28th Street at 6th Avenue, created a rather informal allée, a French term for a garden pathway, usually bordered by trees and bushes. And in this case, however, it was a city street, heavily trafficked and bordered by a continuous run of converted buildings of various vintages, which was to soon serve the music industry, creating an optical as well as audible alley or alleyway. More a little later on as to how this modest commercial strip received its iconic name of Tin Pan Alley. At this moment in time, in 1898, Harry Von Tilzer enters the picture when he comes to 28th Street as a new employee of William C. Dunn and Company, whose business moves into the newly vacated Whitmark offices. Here, I'm going to single out Harry Von Tilzer to serve as an example of the workings of the music publishing industry here on Tin Pan Alley. Harry's story was typical of the many talents who set up shop here. Their paths would cross and intertwine, and songwriters and publishers would find themselves oftentimes collaborating and forming new partnerships, as well as establishing music publishing companies with each other, making it a bit challenging at times to place a particular publisher in a particular address at a particular time as the street evolved. Harry was quite an interesting character who had always been fascinated with performers, stage lights, and drama. And his love for make-believe as a young child had really never fully left him, having even run away to join the circus in his youth. His career in the entertainment and music world would evolve and lead him to become known as the Dean of Tin Pan Alley. He was to become master of song plugging. This was a method by which publishers and performers more or less worked together to get their music out to the public. Harry was one of the first to approach not only singers, but actors as well to perform his material. Oftentimes, these song pluggers had to devise innovative methods of finding their way into various entertainment venues. At the time, song plugging was the only way for music publishers to publicize their latest creations. They were dependent on this method for their sheet music sales. Their hope was that copies of their latest hits would find their way into every parlor with an upright piano, both accessible and affordable at the time. Here are a couple of examples of inventive song plugging. Harry Von Tilzer, in an effort to song plug one of his tunes, Please Let Me Sleep, actually placed himself in the balcony of a nearby theater and proceeded to snore very loudly. A partner in crime tried to nudge him, and he would repeatedly say, "Please let me sleep." After several such attempts to wake him, and with the audience annoyed and their attention turned to the balcony, they witnessed Harry finally being escorted to the door, but not before breaking into song, singing, "Please go away and let me sleep. Don't disturb my slumber deep."
Please go away and let me sleep. Don't disturb my slumber deep. I would rather sleep than eat, for sleep to me is such a treat.
With a few others in on the scheme planted in the audience, the catchy tune was repeated several times, and by the end of the theater performance, the pluggers' mission was accomplished with the tune firmly committed to memory of those in attendance. The other thing that some other people planted in the audience were clappers. In other words, once these songs that were being plugged were out there, like "Please Go Away and Let Me Sleep," you'd hear all of this applause, erupt, and people thought it was for these songs that were being plugged, as opposed to the theater they had come to see for the evening. So that was another extension of the song plugging. Shapiro Bernstein Publishing, who we will meet shortly at 45 West 28th, Louis Bernstein recalled taking the plugging crew to cycle races at nearby Madison Square Garden. These could be 6-day events. And a lot of these folks decided that they would endure those 6 nights as the bikers were enduring their riding. When people walked out, they'd all be humming those tunes. The ultimate song plugging venue emerged in 1893 with the opening of the Chicago World's Columbian Exposition. The event aligning at just about the same time as Whitmore moved to West 28th Street. With all the attention and publicity the exposition generated and the millions of visitors it attracted, and with music being a major feature of the exposition, the Whitmarks decided to open a Chicago office to take advantage of all the business opportunities the fair had to offer. One of the most famous tunes to come out of their fair was After the Ball by Charles K. Harris, who, by chance, had maintained a New York office within 4951 as well. Whitmark unsuccessfully tried to publish Harris's hit. He knew a hit when he heard it. However, because of its universal appeal and the repetition of the piece at the exposition, Harris thought better. Well, he thought if it was okay for Whitmark, maybe I should self-publish it. So that's what he did. And he wound up with record-setting sales with this infectious and memorable tune.
But after the break of morn, after the dancers leaving, after the stars are gone, many a heart is aching. If you could read them all, many the hopes that have vanished after the ball.
A couple of amusing moments. There was a special magazine that was a Puck publication for the World's Fair. The World's Fair Puck, it was called. So it was filled with cartoons and little snippets, and these were all referring to After the Ball. Here, this is a cartoon of folks sitting, listening to Wagner is the first. They're very still and, bored. The same folks sitting, listening to After the Ball. A couple of amusing moments was that Whitmark got in on the Chicago World's Columbian Exposition picture as well. And here you have the Midway Plaisance.
Thought I'd ride in the Ferris wheel, my life's insured. But by a lunch bell's joyful peal, I was allured. I had soup and a chicken neck, and I got out alive. 19 men figured up my check, 10.25. I met a little girl with romance. I grew dear to her, this was clear to her. But when I said I'm broke, the circumstance made her skip and leave me on the Plaisance. Midway Plaisance, Midway Plaisance.
The Midway Plaisance, which was this mile-long strip, different buildings represented by all the countries in the world on each side. And of course, they brought their music with them. So this was music from all over the world being played, on top of one another. So it was like a little reminiscent and often compared to Tin Pan Alley in New York City. And so this photo right here, you see the Midway photographically, and this photo is being taken from the top of the Ferris wheel, and we all know the Ferris wheel from the exposition, which was located right in the middle, right there on the Midway Plaisance, as it was known. So there's the Midway leading to the fairgrounds in the background like that, but that's the way you would get to where you were going. These were one of several, this large picture of these colossal venues that were built, like 5 or 6 of them throughout the fair, because how else were people going to hear the music other than get together? And these, you can see, I believe there's an orchestra and choral group, whatever, leading this, and then all the folks who came in to listen. And if you didn't want to get involved with that, you went home with your closest friends and stood around the parlor upright. Anyway, so we continue with the evolution of Harry von Tilzer. by 1899, Dunn and Company, Harry's initial employer, had decided to move a couple doors east to number 45. Remember 45, West 28th, where Dunn was bought out by a publisher in residence there, Shapiro, Bernstein and Company, at which point Harry decided to join them and form a new company, Shapiro, Bernstein, and von Tilzer. And one of the first tunes that actually von Tilzer produced was A Bird in the Gilded Cage. So here you see them all together on this piece of sheet music represented, and here they are at number 45. Before we continue to follow Harry, I would just like to point out that number 45 was flanked by two prestigious complementary companies serving the entertainment business. The New York Clipper to the west at 47, and to the east, the William Morris Agency at number 43. The New York Clipper ran ads and editorials about the latest in music, theater, and sports. This weekly entertainment paper had been founded in 1853 and was absorbed by Variety in 1924. The William Morris Agency was founded in New York in 1898 and became the largest and most diversified literary and talent agency in the world. In 2009, they merged with Endeavor Talent Agency, a Beverly Hills-based company, to form William Morris Endeavor. The New York branch of their offices are located today at 11 Madison Avenue in the old North Building of the MetLife Complex on Madison Square. The very presence of these companies, originally located here on West 28th Street, reinforces the context of Tin Pan Alley as part of the larger early 20th century entertainment district. It was also on the roof of number 43 that we have, which would have been on top of the William Morris Agency building. We have Thomas Edison shooting some of his very early films just one block south in 1895 at the southwest corner of West 27th Street in Broadway. The world's first kinetoscope parlor opened its doors and introduced the first commercial exhibition of motion pictures. It was there that customers paying 25 cents lined up to view and enjoy some of Edison's early motion pictures by peering through one of 10 Edison peephole viewers. By 1901, Harry had created quite a following for himself and decided to strike out on his own and moved across the street to the south side of 28th Street, where he opened his office, Harry von Tilzer, music publisher. And it was by this time, some of the early residential buildings on the south side were being converted to commercial use, while others were demolished for new, taller office structures. Once settled into his new offices, Harry was visited by a news reporter by the name of Monroe Rosenfeld, a journalist for both the New York Clipper and the New York Herald. And it was said it is he who coined the phrase Tin Pan Alley. Harry was in his office in an adjoining room working on a new tune and came out to greet Rosenfeld, who proceeded to question Harry about why the sound of his piano seemed so muffled and not quite right. Harry replied that he was trying to achieve a banjo effect. And by stuffing newspapers behind the piano strings, he was able to produce the tinny sound effect he was after. More likely, he was trying to hide the clear melody from his next door neighbor publishers. One might imagine that this cacophony of sounds Rosenfeld encountered. He began to analyze this audio assault, and as he walked 28th Street, took the piano music emanating from every window of these buildings, all the pianos trying to overplay one another. He likened the sound to the banging of pots and pans. Rosenfeld, who was looking for the title for a forthcoming article, decided that he would write about the area and called the piece Down in Tin Pan Alley. Somewhere along the way, Rosenfeld was inspired to try to write a couple of tunes, but apparently none to any known notoriety or fanfare. Harry continued to grow his new office on the south side of the block by utilizing the pages of the New York Clipper by taking out large half-page ads featuring the fact that he was now his own entity, free from Shapiro and Bernstein, who were slow to drop the von Tilzer name from their company. The longer they could hold on to his name, the better they would do, because that's how well thought of von Tilzer was. With his name emblazoned in these ads, he was able to achieve his goal and soon expanded his popularity and opened a second office, again on the north side of number 37, where he wrote and published Wait Till the Sun Shines, Nellie.
Wait till the sun shines, Nellie, when the clouds go drifting by. We will be happy, Nellie.
This was the building, which is now the neighbor of our brand new Ritz-Carlton Hotel. So, and here it is in the Strip. So you recognize the Strip already. So this building is still there and was built in 1911. So before we continue, a few lighthearted illustrations. So here you have, there's 3 pages of these delightful cartoons. Here over the center fold, we have a suggestion of the north side of 28th Street with music pouring out of the windows of these buildings. And you see people sort of running towards Sixth Avenue and the L with a little abstract suggestion of the L. And others who can't run away because they're waiting for their appointments. They were like almost daily visitors and very well-known people, but they didn't want to miss their opportunity to be called in for their appointment to perform for some of the publishers. So now you know what it looked like on the outside. On the inside, we have, I don't know about you, but I've always wondered what it must have been to be inside one of these buildings. And this is very simple little illustration that shows that, all the apartments were stripped of and the walls broken down, and they were just like long corridors. And people could go from one building to the other pretty easily. Maybe sometimes they broke through those walls, and sometimes they could use the fire escapes that you just saw to go up into to reach every publisher they could as fast as they could. So now we have a hallway. We have on one side of that broad hallway, we have all of these doors lead into separate publishers. And these people standing here are lucky enough because they're about to be called in. But you can see how close in proximity the music was produced, right, one next to each other, one on top of each other. And here you have a publisher and a song plugger, the publisher with a violinist and her accompanist, and we have these 2 guys doing their little 2-step. I mean, they did everything here. There were like little theater performances and vaudeville, etc., showing off their talents to these publishers. And then this lovely little group right here who thinks they're close enough to a window to maybe catch a new tune. But they said sometimes it would come down, but not all the time. Anyway, and this was called the Hallway of Melodies. Anyway, I love that. And last but not least, we have theater audiences that are flocking from Tin Pan Alley to find their latest song that they just heard. They're coming from the theater. It's getting late. They must go home with something in hand of a tune they heard at the theater or just in passing through the neighborhood. And there you see the L, which they'll all be flocking to with their sheet music, and they'll be happy campers. And this also gives you an idea that the buildings on the right, on the uptown side of the street, were lower row house. It maintained its row house scale, where the south side became more developed. And if you couldn't find what you wanted in that shop, if you went like about 10 blocks south, you'd come on the wonderful and imposing Siegel Cooper Emporium, just a couple of blocks south of 23rd Street on 6th Avenue. And you could then be treated to their sprawling sheet music department with all of these people just waiting to help you. And there was a guy back there with a piano who could play something if you had forgotten your tune, or he could help you remember it. If you think things were not complicated enough, to complicate it a little further, we have Harry von Tilzer, who had a brother by the name of Albert von Tilzer. By chance, happened to have worked in the offices of the York Music Company, located at number 40 on the south side of 28th Street, directly next door to Harry's number 42. It was in 1908 that Albert wrote a little tune, "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." This one song almost turned out to gain Albert more notoriety in his lifetime than his brother, Harry. An interesting note, Albert had never attended a baseball game until some 20 years after he wrote the song.
Take me out to the ball game. Take me out with the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and cracker jack. I don't care if I never get back. Let me root for our own team. If they don't win, it's a shame. But it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game.
It was not uncommon for songwriters of Tin Pan Alley to write about places that they had never experienced firsthand. And a fine example of this was created by our old friend and Albert's brother, Harry, and whose earliest tune, or hit, I should say, was "My Old New Hampshire Home," a place Harry had never visited and which was to become the state song of New Hampshire. In 1903, with Harry pursuing his own successful career on the block and no longer a part of Shapiro Bernstein at number 45, the Detroit businessman by the name of Jerome H. Remick arrived and bought out Bernstein's half, forming Shapiro, Remick and Company. Don't forget, this is still number 45 that's going through all of these changes and new partnerships. Remick bought with him a branch of the Whitney Warner Publishing Company, a struggling music business which he had saved and favorably turned around. The Whitney Warner name was prominently displayed across the adjoining facades of both numbers 45 and 43, the William Morris Agency building, indicating that they might have maintained additional office space within William Morris. So it was while Remick and Shapiro were together for a brief time in 1904 that they published new musical gems from The Wizard of Oz, written by Wilby Cobb and Gus Edwards. There were a number of songs from early stage version of The Wizard of Oz, which became very popular in Act Two of this production, which was titled The Emerald City. We find the wizard giving the scarecrow a brain and the Tin Woodman a heart. The wizard declares this the greatest of all his achievements and calls for a celebration. The ball of all nations is thrown, in which up to a dozen songs are sung by various performers, not part of the cast. These songs appear to have been a random selection meant for pure entertainment and not part of the Wizard of Oz storyline. This was not unlike Act Two of The Fledermaus, where a party scene features famous opera singers, dancers, and orchestral pieces unrelated to the opera itself. So Shapiro, Remick, and company decided to cleverly take advantage of The Wizard of Oz and publish these random add-on musical numbers, riding on the coattails of the publicity that once associated with Baum's well-known story. Of course, with Tin Pan Alley not lacking for musical material and talent, the show's Act Two could continuously change and introduce a roster of new melodies and performers. One of the major hits included in the new musical gems was an infectious tune called Sammy. Just one short year later, in 1905, Jerome Remick bought out Shapiro at number 45, establishing Jerome H. Remick and Company, and by 1906 bought the rights to the Dill Pickles rag by Charles L. Johnson, which was to become the first rag to sell 1 million copies. The sheet music industry embraced the large Afro-American and Eastern European musical talents of the day, including Scott Joplin and the Maple Leaf Rag, from which he emerged as the king of ragtime. Bob Cole, Rosamond Johnson, and James Weldon Johnson, Under the Bamboo Tree, sold over 400,000 copies, one of the biggest sellers of its time. George M. Cohan, of Irish descent, wrote two memorable tunes, Give My Regards to Broadway and I'm a Yankee Doodle Dandy, in 1904. At about the same time, at the age of 16, Irving Berlin went to work for our friend Harry Von Tilzer as a song plugger when Von Tilzer was located at 37, the tall building we just saw before. Berlin went on to live to 101 and was considered one of the greatest songwriters in American history. He wrote some 1,500 songs in his lifetime: Alexander's Ragtime Band, Blue Skies, Easter Parade, God Bless America, and White Christmas, to mention a few. George Gershwin was spotted in and around 28th Street as a youngster. Workers at the New York Clipper remember seeing him next door within the Remick offices, where perhaps he played the piano to accompany singers or did some song plugging for a little early stage exposure. Even though Gershwin died at 39, he produced some of the most distinguished music: Rhapsody in Blue, An American in Paris, and Porgy and Bess. The Remick firm remained on Tin Pan Alley until 1908, before moving to West 41st Street. Remick's volume of published songs remained the largest of any Tin Pan Alley firm until the end of World War I, at which time it relocated once again to West 46th Street. Its back catalog is now part of the Warner Chappell Music, Inc. Many Tin Pan Alley publishers followed suit, moving uptown, eventually finding a home in the Brill Building by 1931 at 49th Street and Broadway. The Brill Building was to be coined the vertical Tin Pan Alley. Capping off the north side of 28th Street and near Broadway. We're working ourselves up to Broadway, and here you see the familiar building I've taken you to, which was located right where you see this lovely theater. It is located right where the theater stood here. Peter Gilsey, we might not know who that is, but you do. He had built the Gilsey House Hotel at the northeast corner of 29th Street and Broadway. It's an individual landmark, and it's right there, cut off a little, to the far east side of the block of the alley at 33 West 28th Street. North was Peter Gilsey's house. So not only did he build the hotel around the corner, he also built this theater and called it the Gilsey Apollo Hall in 1868, which was just adjacent to his house. It was renamed the St. James in 1870. By 1873, reimagining it again as the new Fifth Avenue Theater, relocated from West 24th Street by Augustin Daly. And that was the Fifth Avenue Theater was actually adjacent to the old Fifth Avenue Hotel. So, it was a very fashionable place down there, and had its own little theater district. In 1877, John T. Ford takes over and renames the new Fifth Avenue Theater just the Fifth Avenue Theater, not the new one anymore. So that was just like 4 years later. And then unfortunately, in 1891, the theater was destroyed by fire. They didn't take a breath, but they rebuilt the theater, and it was designed by Francis Hatch Kimball and run by Henry Miner, who it turns out was a major manager and impresario of theaters in the area. Interesting to read a little more about him. By 1900, Keith joins Proctor and becomes Keith and Proctor's vaudeville house and motion picture venue. By 1930s, it becomes a burlesque house, and it ends its time here as a movie house in 1938. And by 1939, it's demolished. Here you see it from our corner, looking west on 28th Street North. So you can start to see the houses, the 1850 row houses, and the new music venues of Tin Pan Alley. And we come around the corner to Broadway facade, and we see the Keith and Proctor's Theater, By 1940s, these structures were demolished, and they put up like a one-story building that stretched all the way around the corner like this. And up until 4 years ago, it was like a two-story parking garage that people might remember. We certainly don't remember experiencing this. Anyway, so we go on, and we have this parking garage, and what a place to add an exclamation mark so that if you look up from Madison Square Park on Broadway, this is exactly what you're going to see, and you'll know exactly where Tin Pan Alley is. And there's the building once again appearing. That was Von Tilser's last place of business. And up pops the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. Just quickly, I wanted to relate somehow, if I could, the Ritz-Carlton to Tin Pan Alley. The origin of Ritz-Carlton in New York City began in 1907. The site selected was the corner of Madison Avenue and 46th Street. The architects were Charles Wetmore and Robert Goelet. They, along with Whitney Warren, who was a noted proprietor of Manhattan real estate, organized in America a hotel whose management and operation would reflect the Ritz Hotels Development Company of England. This was just about the time that the music industry of Tin Pan Alley was making their way uptown. Remick remained on Tin Pan Alley until 1908 before moving to West 41st Street, and remained there until the end of World War II, when they relocated to West 46th. So the Ritz and the relocated vestiges of the publishers of 28th Street found their roots on 46th Street, the hotel on Manhattan's east side, and music of Tin Pan Alley on the west side. Irving Berlin's popular Puttin' on the Ritz, as realized by Fred Astaire, was a major hit in 1946. And if you just Google Fred Astaire and Puttin' on the Ritz, you will just love it. A great performance. And of course, you couldn't beat the tune. Also, everyone always questions, isn't there a plaque or something to remind us? And efforts to save Tin Pan Alley go back quite a bit. Almost 50 years ago in the 1970s, this plaque was installed at the southeast corner of West 28th Street between Fifth Avenue and Broadway. Music publishers such as M. Whitmark and Sons became so successful so quickly that they would change locations within the area to larger quarters, like the Whitmarks, for example, after 6 years on 28th, moved just around the corner, as we saw before, to 8 West 29th Street. Here we have illustrated and why we have a plaque on 28th Street east of Broadway. So there's a reason why it's hard for folks to find it. On July 27th, 1976, New York Times ran an article, Tin Pan Alley Remembered is celebrated. In a half-hour ceremony, a bronze plaque was dedicated at 36 West 28th Street as part of the bicentennial parade of American music. Mr. Leonard Feist read a letter from Irving Berlin, who was at the time was 88 years old. And I just want to say that Leonard Feist had a huge music publishing company on the south side of 28th Street between Broadway and Sixth Avenue. You should remember his name. And at the time that Berlin was 88, he was expressing his regrets at not being able to attend the ceremony. Mr. Berlin went on to say that in 1903, he wrote a song about which he didn't think very much of it. But to quote him at the time, he said, but it meant a lot to me that I had made it to Tin Pan Alley. So we're coming to the concluding our little trip on Tin Pan Alley with the band Played On, which was written by Charles B. Ward. And just to the west of the 5 landmark buildings, we have number 57 West 28th Street, where the band Played On was created.
For Dizzy would waltz with the strawberry blonde, and the band played on. He'd glide across the floor with the girl he adored, and the band played on. But his brain was so loaded it nearly exploded. The poor girl would shake with alarm. He'd ne'er leave the girl with the strawberry curls, and the band played on.
A few closing words. What made the concept of Tin Pan Alley such a success was that working relationship it established with performers and the show business industry, generally combined with its modes of production. Music provided on demand, tailored to particular needs in a professional, business-like manner. These attributes laying the ground for those who followed, record producers and filmmakers, all knew where to go when they needed a song. In the era prior to radio broadcasting and before sound recordings became the dominant format for transmission of popular music, the scale of Tin Pan Alley's distribution was unprecedented. Tin Pan Alley had proved that enormous fortunes could be made off a single song, a fact that publishers never forgot. Tin Pan Alley had given us the idea of the hit song, and associated with that, the song that remains a favorite or the standard, which makes up the repertoire of a vast number of popular and jazz musicians. The term Tin Pan Alley is applied and utilized to this day as a representation of the type of music which was produced right here. The number of still current songs performed by musicians all over the globe today, which emerged from Tin Pan Alley, is a testament to the affection the world holds for this iconic street to this day.